You are listening to the FDIP, the official podcast of the Faculty Development and Innovation Center. I am Dr. Michael Gillespie, the director of the FDIC, and your host today. Today I'm speaking with Jessie Shuemaker, who is the director of EIU's Office of Accessibility and Accommodations. And we're talking about digital accessibility, these new regulations for the Americans with Disabilities Act for digital accessibility, and some other tips and tricks and ideas for making our courses accessible. So let's head over to the interview. It's a good one.
Why don't you just go ahead and introduce yourself and what you do and tell us a little bit about your office.
Okay. I'm Jessie Shuemaker. I'm the director for the Office of Accessibility and Accommodations. We help support students here at Eastern that have documented disabilities to get primarily academic accommodations.
So we're talking about digital accessibility today with some new rules that have come through the ADA and Department of Justice. So I was wondering if you could just talk about digital accessibility in higher education and how it's a benefit for all of our students, not just our students with accommodations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so digital accessibility is a pretty important topic, especially right now. Like you said, there's some new laws coming down the line. It's great for all students. It makes sure that all students can access the learning environment, the content that's being delivered to them. And we know all students don't learn the same way. Everybody has different needs, disability related or not. Mm-hmm. So it's really just best to kind of be proactive and be thinking about the different changes you can make to your courses. Kind of one of the examples I like to think about when thinking about accessibility for everybody, when you think about how sidewalks we didn't have ramps, we didn't have the curb cuts before, those benefit everybody. Mm-hmm. If you're a parent pushing a stroller, if you're somebody running, it's just easier to go through that. If you're on skates or a skateboard or something, your bicycle, and that kind of applies to the academic setting as well.
Sure. Excellent. That's great. That's a really great example because we sometimes take those things for granted. Mm-hmm. And when we're, especially maybe out on our bike or our rollerblades, going down those little ramps a lot easier than trying to jump over a curb, right? So, and we're really trying to do that for our students now, is trying to get them those easy on and off ramps without having to jump curbs. So
exactly.
It works. One of the things we talk about a lot in the center is Universal Design for Learning, UDL, and its core principles. Can you explain that concept and how it might tie in with some of this digital accessibility stuff?
Sure. So there's kind of an overall just like universal design, some best practices for that includes universal design for learning, just some principles of just general universal design that apply to like a workplace also, not just an academic setting. And then there's the WCAG rules that are strictly digital accessibility, and they all kind of overlap and tie in together for kind of just general best practices that we should all kind of be striving towards. No kind of need to learn every one of those principles, but universal design for learning, there are 3 key principles to that really focus on the learning environment, and it goes beyond digital accessibility, kind of just into the whole learning environment in general. Right. But there is a big digital piece to that as well, and the WCAG rules kind of come into play with that as well.
Sure. And so you said there's 3 components really to UDL. What are those 3 components?
So the first one, there's 3 kind of guidelines, and the first is engagement. So kind of the why of learning. Why are we here? What are we wanting to learn? The second is representation. So kind of the what of learning. How are you going to provide that information to the students? And then the third is action and expression. So the how are kind of more like the assessment of learning. How are you going to figure out what students took away from your class? Okay. So how are you going to know that they got what they were supposed to get? And so UDL kind of just considers, like we said, what are the possible ways the student can access, interact with, and then kind of give back to you what they got from the course.
Sure. Excellent. And I can really think about maybe those latter 2 are really where the digital accessibility stuff comes in. Can you talk a little bit about how that creates this learning environment where we want to have it be inclusive and accessible for everybody?
Yeah, so kind of like you said, the big pieces being, how are you presenting your information? Is it accessible to everybody? And then do you have different ways a student can show you to demonstrate that they've learned what you wanted them to learn? And yeah, digital accessibility kind of really does overlap more into those two components of things. We have lectures during class. We talk about stuff. We share information then digitally too. Some of our courses are online. And so just kind of thinking about what modalities are you using? Is it just a PowerPoint? Are you doing handouts? Is there a video component to that as well?
Great.
And then within those things, can all of your students actually access that? Do you have students who struggle with reading? Maybe they have dyslexia. Mm-hmm. They need content to be able to be a screen reader, be able to have that content read to them. You might have students who have mobility impairments, and they need to be able to maybe speak the information instead of type the information. So that's kind of how can they show you what they've learned. So just being mindful of those kinds of things, captioning videos, stuff like that.
Right, exactly. Transcripts for audio, those sorts of things. Good, yeah. And it seems like it can be, there's a lot to it, and it can become overwhelming. And I think what some of these guidelines are ways for us to be able to really focus in on the types of things that we can do to help make these documents, multimedia, whatever it might be, in our courses more accessible for students. So we can kind of laser focus in on it a little bit. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
You think? Mm-hmm. So you direct the Office of Accessibility and Accommodations. So you really work with a lot of learners about the things that they can get accommodated. You kind of get their paperwork in. You work with faculty members, hopefully to get some of this material accessible in their courses. What are the most common things that you encounter when you're working with faculty members and course materials and getting those accessible? And then what are some things that we can do to maybe be proactive about that?
So kind of one of the biggest things our office assists with is alternative textbooks. So we work on securing those for students who need, for whatever reason, need a digital copy of a textbook. So whether that's to use a screen reader with the textbook, to be able to enlarge print, things like that.
Sure.
I think some of the biggest things we see that come up as issues or things that aren't accessible that students sometimes have problems with. More of the digital side of things would be a PDF that's been uploaded and the screen reader doesn't work with it. You can't resize it. There's not alternative text on the images. Things like that are probably the most common issues we run into. Sometimes we get in a hurry and maybe there's an article we read that was really great and we want to share it with the class. You made some notes on it. You highlighted some things. You underlined some stuff. You scan it in really quick and then you just send it out there to your students as a PDF, and we didn't do any of the extra stuff to make sure that it was actually accessible.
Right.
So I think those are the things sometimes, students not getting kind of just a clean copy of stuff, so it's harder to read because you made notes on it or highlighted things, and then it's not accessible by some of those assistive tech pieces as well.
Sure.
I think probably captioning videos is probably the other biggest thing. A lot of people are kind of waiting until they get that notice from our office that's, oh, hey, now you have to do it. We have a student who needs that as part of their accommodation.
Right.
And then there's kind of that like, oh, I got to get on this and I got to do it fast. And it can be a little bit of a process to get that done.
Sure. Yeah, it is a process. And luckily we have some technology that can do it fairly well, and it's getting better. Thank goodness. I had a conversation with somebody last week who said, if students have accommodation or they have something where they're going to need some assisted technology, they're going to have that already. They're going to be able to use it. They're going to know how to use it. But there's a sort of a failure in that logic, right? Because we need to have our end to be able to be accessible by that technology.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so it falls back on us when we're putting this material together. And all the assistive technology in the world is not going to work if the documents aren't set up to actually do what they're supposed to do. So I think that's going to be a big hurdle with this, right?
Yep.
So videos, closed captioning, PDFs, any other sort of big ticket issues that you generally see or hear from our students who you work with?
I think those are kind of the biggest issues as far as the kind of the digital side of things.
Awesome. How you doing? You're good?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think go to some strategies now. Be good. Okay. So can you discuss some easy to implement strategies that faculty can use to make their documents and presentations and multimedia content more accessible?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So kind of thinking just the simplest things when it comes to universal design for learning. So like I said earlier, that includes more than just your digital content. That includes just the whole learning environment. So I think about those things first and then kind of build on that. Facing the class when you speak.
Sure.
Shutting the door to drown out background noise, things like that. Just speaking slowly, making sure students are hearing what you're saying, making sure they have time to take notes.
Great.
Note-taking accommodations are a big thing in our office, and they're on the rise. So kind of just those things are very simple and easy to do. I know you kind of get in the lesson and you get going and you're in your groove and just trying to remember take a step back, slow down.
Sure.
Some other easy things are thinking about the font style that you use. If you are handing out information to students, if you're giving them paper copies of stuff, and even in your presentations, making sure you use ideally a sans serif font.
Great.
That's easier for students with reading disabilities or visual impairments to read. Using a bigger font size, like at least a 14-point font. Using high contrast. I know that's kind of probably going to break some hearts out there. We were always kind of taught presentations need to be big and flashy. You've got to have, all the bright colors and all the cool pictures and everything. But the plainer, the better, honestly, when it comes to accessibility. So, that big plain font on a big plain background.
Dark font on a light background.
Yep.
Right? Yeah.
So just think about some of those kinds of things. They're very easy to incorporate.
They are.
And then just building those things in and then adding more as you go along, kind of taking small steps. Though I know with the Title II updates, we don't have a lot of time to take small steps, but just to kind of, in general, just be thinking about different things you can add or change to your class.
Sure.
Another thing I think is important is letting students know that if there's some kind of issue you are having with any of the content, that you are willing to speak to them about it, just being open about. You can always make adjustments if they're having any issues or have some kind of additional accommodation need that maybe it's not in a letter somewhere.
Right.
Just being open and having those honest conversations with students is very important.
Flexible, adaptable, really good because we want them to be able to get the same experience, and that's what the point of this is, right? Even for folks who might not need a screen reader or might not need the captions. I know I put the captions on my TV at home when I'm watching television, and it's easier, right? And it helps us to be able to digest that content a lot more simple too. Yeah.
One of the other things too is I saw a statistic recently that said only 1 in 5 students who actually have a disability will come to our office and disclose that information.
That's right.
Across the country, that's kind of the statistic right now. So the odds are you have a lot more students in your class who probably need accommodations who don't officially have accommodations. So you never know who could benefit from some of these things. Yeah,
that's only 20%, right? 20% of the students who would need this are actually able to do that. So that says a lot to me. I teach statistics, so this is that's a good one. I want to remember that one.
But then just kind of doing these things up front makes those students feel, it just kind of makes them feel more like they belong to, and then they don't feel like maybe they have to disclose. They don't feel that need to I have to go to the office to get these things now. So.
Sure. Yeah. They have somebody there who's willing to do this, right? And talks to them about it on the first day.
Right.
Great. Some of the strategies you talked about too, I was just thinking when you're facing a class, make sure that you're talking clearly, slowly enough so that if folks depend on your mouth to help communicate in ways that aren't just the sound. Well, the same goes for videos too. If you're recording videos, you face the camera so that the person watching the video can do that same thing too, right? So some of these things work in both worlds, in the classroom and in the digital space. So I think those are really great suggestions and strategies to get a long way, right? And get really some folks going. One of the questions that we got, and I added this a little bit or before, is heading structure. What is it with heading structure?
Well, I mean, even if you just look at something and the heading is all weird and the bullet points are they don't make a lot of sense, it's important just for anybody to be able to look at a document and understand this information goes with this component, this goes with something else. But I guess for the purposes of this discussion, screen readers, that's a big key to it. Just if it's not formatted very well, then the screen reader can jump all around the page and the information doesn't flow and the student's not going to understand the content in the same way.
Sure. And it goes back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, is if our documents don't fit what the technology needs, the technology is kind of not going to work correctly.
Right.
And those headers guide the screen reader right through the text a little bit. And it does that for things like Adobe too, PDFs, is you have to actually go in and say, read this first, read this second, read this third. And it's part of the technology. So the heading structure, but also sort of the reading structure of the documents are really important for this. Another question that comes up is we get several faculty who use third-party ancillaries that aren't part of our suite of things that we support all the time. You know, Pearson's My Lab, and there's some other stuff that some of the STEM fields will bring in. How do you work with these third-party sources to ensure that they're accessible to? Part of these new rules means that all of that third-party stuff has to be accessible. But even before we get to that, I mean, what are some things faculty can do to vet some of these sources so that we can make sure that they're accessible?
A lot of things now have like an accessibility checker kind of built into it. We know like a lot of, the things we use, like Microsoft and Adobe, have those kinds of things. So if the program has something like that, I would say definitely try that. Or just try it on your own and see, like, if you were a student who needed a screen reader or you needed alternate text or things like that, is the program picking that up when you try to do those things? But there are also programs out there that you can use that will run through your information and see, and I know the FDIC webpage has some examples for that.
We do, thank you. We do, and that's really a great point, because one of the things that we talk to faculty about is, here's some technology we can actually use and just test it out, see what it's like on the other end, so that you know when you're doing these things exactly how it's going to play out for your learners to be able to interact with your content. So
that's a good point.
And some of the other stuff too, just off the top of my head that we've been looking into, is D2L is actually really robust in its accessibility features, and it already does meet these WCAG standards, and it has things in there like you can write formulas for math or science, and it will be screen reader compliant because of just the coding that's already in there. And so there's lots of things that I don't think we've tapped into yet that are available to us to be able to help out some of these things as well.
Yeah.
So one last question for you.
Okay.
So looking ahead, emerging technologies, because we got a 2-year window to put all this stuff into place, but then it's not going to go away, right?
No,
and so
it's
going to be something that's going to be continually happening, a really important piece of conversation that we're going to have continually. So what do you see as some trends that might be impacting some of the digital accessibility?
Yeah. So I think we have to talk about the elephant in the room of AI.
Yes.
It's here. It's not going anywhere.
That's right.
We've got to learn to embrace it. And I know that's, when used correctly, there are a lot of good features to AI, and especially when it comes to accessibility. I mentioned note-taking earlier. We have a lot of students, just campus-wide, we have a lot of students who don't know how to take notes.
Yeah.
They don't know what to write down. They don't know what to get from the lecture. If they're reading out of the book, they don't know what kind of information they're supposed to get from that. But one of the accommodations we kind of grant through our office is some note-taker accommodations for students who need it for a disability-related reason.
Sure.
Whether they physically can't take the notes or just they kind of need to supplement with what they are able to take. And historically, we've kind of relied more on a peer note-taker. We don't pay those note takers. They're volunteers. So sometimes it's hard to find a volunteer. Sometimes the volunteer doesn't take very good notes. Sure. And that's not really best practice these days, especially with all the technology that's out there.
Yeah.
There are a lot of different note-taking like apps, software things that are available for students. But some of the best ones are using AI components at this point. And so they can listen to your lecture. They put things on the page beautifully. There's bullet points. It's amazing. So I think those things are really great for accessibility, and we're going to have to learn to live with it, I think
so. What are some of those note-taking apps that you've seen that you really like?
So I just went to a conference and they were putting big plugs in for Otter AI and Glean.
Okay.
So those are kind of the two biggest ones out there. And from what I've seen for what they do, they are kind of the best for students who need those for disability-related reasons. Microsoft OneNote is actually pretty good for note-taking. We're working on creating some resources through our office to kind of help train students on how to use that for note-taking for the purposes of an accommodation also. But yeah, there's some recording and some dictation features within OneNote that can be beneficial for some of those students just want to listen to stuff.
Sure.
Again, to help supplement the notes that they already took. And then some students would benefit more from kind of that dictation piece. But the Microsoft OneNote isn't there at that level yet, like the Glean or Otter AI are.
Sure,
so.
yeah. And another thing about those technologies that I really like too is not only do you get that summary, but you also get the transcripts. And so just like if we're talking about putting some audio in D2L, then the student will have the transcript of your lecture too, so they can actually go back and they can see word for word and be able to follow it and then be able to get back into the content too. So it really it is smart use of AI. It really is, and it's going to be beneficial. For sure. Are there any other emerging things that you're excited about for our students who use your office, or just our students in general?
Just our students in general. Yeah. It's a growing population. We've got a lot of students coming in, and I don't think that even if the overall student population of the campus were to decrease, I don't think the population of students accessing our office would decrease.
Right. Right. So it's going to be there, right? Yep. Job security is nice. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been super helpful. And I know we'll work a lot together already, and we'll probably be doing a lot more in the coming couple of years, but I appreciate this so much. If someone's looking to find you, where will they find you at?
We are in McAfee, room 1336. I always call it the basement, but I recently saw that we can also call it the garden level.
Okay. There you go. The garden level. Very good. And it's close to where the food pantry is and the testing center.
Around the corner from just down the corner from the testing center.
Awesome. Well, we're good. Well, Jessie, thanks for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
I want to thank Jessie Shuemaker one last time for joining us on this episode of the FDIP. She's such a great advocate for all of our learners across campus. And I found this to be really insightful as we continue to work through these new rules and regulations on digital accessibility for all learners. The FDIP is the official podcast of the Faculty Development and Innovation Center at EIU. I've been your host, Dr. Michael Gillespie, and I direct the FDIC. This podcast series is to further promote teaching excellence through the sharing of information related to instructional design, teaching strategies, and innovation. Until next time, please take good care of yourself.